All right. Hey. Hey, everybody. I'm Jamie. Welcome back. We are back with another video and back with a very special guest. Please welcome Norman Maslow, best known as Mazzy, on the vinyl community in the VC. Hi, Mazzy.
Hey, Jamie, box set king.
The box set king. Well, I don't know, the king of all media, like Norman Maslow, Mazzy, you've been just doing gangbusters on the VC. I know your subscriber count is just going great and well deserved, shall I say.
Well, thank you, thank you. It's funny that it's the ranking things that kicked in, and I didn't want to do those for a long time, and I have to do them in my way. But I do it very personal, so subjective. So, but people seem to like them.
Yeah, and I love your spotlights or your sort of, what is it, the vinyl junkie kind of series or growing up.
I
Those
do
are
a
great.
series, yeah. Since I'm a first generation to a lot of these records, I'm at that age group. I grew up in the late '60s, mostly in the '70s, but I grew up with the Beatles, and so all those records that came out. So I've been doing these years in random order, and I've done about 14 of them so far, where I feature a year, show records that came out the year, and talk about my personal loves, life, loss, experiences during that time. And I'm surprised people seem to latch onto those and write about their experiences that relate to that music too. And that's what it's all about. Because I mean, we can show records and we all love seeing records, but I want to do something a little different. So that's one series.
And one
So
part of what you present is your photography background. And you are a photography, is it manager? You have a stable of artists, or what's your background?
I am a photo agent. And when people ask me what I do and I say that, most people have no idea what that means. And then I kind of go, would you ever see the movie Jerry Maguire? You know, Show Me the Money, Tom Cruise. He was an agent for sports athletes. Actors have agents, directors have agents, and theatrical agents. Well, photographers, I represent a stable of commercial photographers. So they cross over. They do some album covers, not as much as I'd like to, and not as much anymore. But we do a lot of advertising, a lot of food packaging, and I've been doing this for 35 years now. So I market them, I promote them, I negotiate licenses and fees for productions, but it's pretty much photo shoots and productions. And I've been doing that for a long time, self-employed. I love it when it's great. And then obviously the last year productions have gone like non-existent. They're coming
Okay.
back a little bit now, food packaging, all
Hmm.
those pizza flavors you see at Safeway and Whole Foods that with the gooey, cheese pulls that I have photographers that do that.
Oh, very good. So again, it is coming back. I was going to ask you how it's going right now, but
Yeah,
it is slowly coming back. Yeah.
it's slowly coming back. The larger productions with people on set. There's all these, COVID protocols and things. It's slower right now for me, but you see these TV show productions going on. It's a similar type of thing. You do a lifestyle shoot for a pharma campaign on a beach, and there's people jumping on the beach on Prozac, and there's stylists and makeup artists and talent, and it's a big production. And now that people are getting their vaccines and things are kind of tapering up, it's starting to move up. But I've been interested in photography since I was about 13. Used to take Super 8 movies. I took a lot of pictures, but I don't consider myself a photographer. But I'm in awe of the artists I work with, and that's why we're going to show some. I picked 10. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
Photographers that do album covers, but not all primarily album covers.
Okay. Yeah. So it's photography and rock and roll, which I think, again, with your expertise with regards to this, and it's something that maybe not doesn't always get the spotlight that it deserves. But where would rock and roll be without the amazing photography to capture those moments, even be it album covers or photography in general? Like it's so intertwined, incredibly so.
Well, it's all about. I mean, it comes down to the basic thing in advertising and fashion magazines that sex sells, and obviously you go to all those early Beatle albums, and I have several photographers that did a lot of Beatle things that I'll showcase, and maybe I'll just jump right in as
Sure.
we
Yeah. Yeah.
talk. And the first photographer that I kind of realized, even though he wasn't the first one to shoot the Beatles, and he didn't do any of the Beatles album covers, but one of the most famous fashion photographers and portrait photographers who, before my time, was shooting for Vogue magazine and Harper's Bazaar, and he was one of those photographers you'd go by one name, even though his name was Avedon, Richard Avedon. And of
Okay.
course, In 1967, he did the series for Look magazine. It was also on the cover of Stern magazine in Germany. And I was 13 years old. And in Look magazine, there'd be a fold out of the Fab Four with these solarized psychedelic pictures, which was very unusual for Avedon because most of his stuff at the time was very rich black and white, the famous fashion shoots he would do. But I sent away, and I don't remember, but it couldn't have been more than $10 to $15 to $20. $20 might have even been expensive to get the whole series of posters. Right, I still have them. They're framed in my house. Oh, so I've had them now 54 years. And I just, there was a first name, photography name that I, fell in love with, obviously the Beatles and, obviously things like Andy Warhol and pop music. But I do collect Beatle books and photography books by a lot of photographers. That was actually a Joan Baez album cover there too. Okay. And just since I'm doing that, I pulled a couple for each artist. So the most famous one that I got into in 1968 was this cover.
Fantastic.
Bookends, photographed by Richard Avedon. Beautiful, heroic black and white photography. And one a little unusual for Avedon, but interesting enough is ELO on the third day.
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't realize he did this one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Cool.
And of course, that the shots have been included. These are the Avedon shots, the 4 shots. And, he didn't do a lot. I think he did a Barbra Streisand album cover. And he wasn't a primary record cover photographer, but, his work crossed over from fashion magazines to advertising to records.
And is he the same photographer who did the Beatles? Is it Love Songs, that double album?
That's the same series. Right. Those were originally black and white photographs, and on the little circular on the cover of Love Songs, and on the inside are the 4 black and white pictures, and those were solarized to make those posters from that session. Okay. I'm not sure if they're all, they might not be all be the exact frames, but yeah, it's from that session as well.
Very good. Nice. Now, in terms of some of that, like black and white, he mainly deals with black and white clearly, or, some color or colorized. Do you have a preference? I love black and white photos, but.
Yeah, I mean, I'm partial to black and white. The whole idea of photography as a collector's medium really only kind of got going as late as like the 1970s, because before that, it almost wasn't considered a fine art form. I mean, there was pop art. I mean, there's obviously historic photographs. You go back to, Ansel Adams, and obviously that's more in the 1960s of the, Carmel, California, Yosemite, and the nature, the Westons there. You go back to early, photographers of Americana like Robert Frank, and a lot of black and white shots, and black and white was always considered archival, and color was not for a long time in the collector's market and museums. And museums only started photo departments again as late as the 70s into the 80s, where it's become in terms of collectors and photography selling for a ton of money. Like, I don't know if you ever heard of Cindy Sherman. Cindy Sherman is a self-portrait photographer that started doing these street shots in the 80s of herself. Okay. She's probably one of the most famous fine art photographers that her work sells in the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And she's done these elaborate setups where she makes herself portraits of herself, like in Renaissance painting or Jersey type housewives. And they're all self-portraits of her made up in these elaborate outfits.
Okay. All right. Oh, very cool. No, I'm not familiar with that artist. Very good.
So black and white is my personal favorite, because a lot of times when you would print images, especially like in the 60s and 50s, the color pigments would fade. So a lot of times, in fact, any of you who are framing posters and framing artwork and framing photography, first of all, 2 little tips. Don't use glass in your frames. Use plexiglass, because maybe because I'm coming from a West Coast where there's earthquakes sometimes. If something falls and you have a valuable print, whether it's a poster or a photograph, the shards of glass can cut into the print. Plexiglass won't cut. And also use UV filtered Plex, because it protects it. Don't put it next to a window where you get a lot of light, because especially color, your images will fade.
Okay.
And if you have rare photographs, if you collect photographs, that's something to take note
Oh,
of.
okay. Yeah, not too many earthquakes around here, but it's a good point. I mean, it can fall and then shatter, and there you go.
Exactly. There you go.
All right.
Another one that's probably one that everybody probably knows because she's the most famous because she's almost a celebrity in her own right, and that's Annie Leibovitz. And people usually know about Annie Leibovitz, and of course, one of her most famous covers is this. It was a cover of Rolling Stone, but the sad part and the irony of this was taken the afternoon of the day John Lennon was murdered.
It was the day.
At,
Wow.
that day at the Dakota. Big fan of Annie Leibovitz. She went to school in San Francisco at Academy of or at the Art Institute, and she was the sort of the first official photographer at Rolling Stone magazine early on. And that famous cover image, Lennon Remembers. There's a book and a magazine a picture she took. This is another one of her images that was taken on that day as well, used on a posthumous best of. This is an 80s image she did, the Rolling Stones.
Okay, I did not know that. Okay.
She also did, probably her most famous album cover is Born on the USA,
Okay,
Bruce
there you
Springsteen.
go.
I mean, she's in countless record covers, Boz Scaggs
Yeah.
record covers, and plenty of others. So I just picked two or three of each photographer that I'm going to show.
Now, for her, what do you like of her style? Just those examples that you showed, there was quite a different. I wouldn't necessarily have thought that was the same photographer for all.
Yeah, well, what's interesting, Annie Leibovitz has gone through different styles, and if you take a Richard Avedon, for a while he was doing these large. Polaroid is a film that used to be a proofing film. So when you were setting up a portrait before digital photography, you'd use a Polaroid to get your lighting right. It's almost like test images, and you would set it up, make sure your frame is right, and you do Polaroid. And after you got your your set, and your Polaroids are in the frame you want, you would switch to film and shoot, however many rolls. And you never knew really if you got it right until you developed it. There's good and bad about digital versus. It's almost like the thing about digital versus analog in music and records a little bit. I like a negative, but there are hardly any labs that develop film anymore. Handful in LA, maybe one in New York, where they do motion picture. Everything is digital. And I totally get that. It's cheaper in so many ways, and you can shoot unlimited rolls of film. I mean, of digital. You could do 1,000 frames, where 1,000 frames of film would cost you so much more when you had to develop it and proof it and everything else.
Yeah. No, exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, she had different styles, and she had a contract, probably still does, I guess, with Vanity Fair. She was the Vanity Fair's magazine, and all the celebrity art shots, a lot of them were hers, and her stuff became more heroic and painter-like. Early on, it was more snapshot style, what they call a little bit of portraiture, reportage. Reportage is a term almost like, it's like journalistic, where you just go and shoot handheld for the moment, natural light work. And there's a photographer later, I'll showcase that his work is all natural light. Annie Leibovitz's work has become very beautifully set up, and portrait lighting and color. And a lot of her talent is how her styling team gets these celebrities to do what they do and to put them in really unique situations.
Like that John Lennon and Yoko. I remember when exactly. That was just, it was shocking, but incredible.
The environment, an older picture of Brian Wilson on the beach with a surfboard. I mean, it seems like an obvious shot. He wasn't a surfer, but because of the Beach Boys, it seems like
his house coat there too. I think that's perfect.
Baryshnikov, Annie Leibovitz, in her setup, almost studio-like. So I'm a fan of hers, but she's probably been the most popular commercial, a lot of advertising, a lot of editorial, a lot of album covers. And I'm a fan. I don't like everything she does, but that's a personal take. But she's done some, you can't deny that she's a great photographer, and she's driven in a wonderful way. And I really like that a lot.
Very nice. Very cool. It's amazing what photographers can bring to their craft. Like, each one is different, has a different way of looking at things, different way of presenting things. That's pretty cool.
Well, there's a thing about people who are really good technically, whether it's in tech or music or synthesizers or whatever it is, but then you got to have the soul of it. And I've learned from working with these amazing photographers I work with, I think at least, and photographers I've known over the years, a real talent is getting the person to feel comfortable in front of a camera. Now, some cynic will say, well, Anna Leibovitz, she's shooting all these celebrities. They're so used to being in front of the camera and they can ham it up and they can do their shtick and everything.
Just turn it on.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's harder. Like most of the photographers I work with, we've done some celebrity work over the years, like Michelle Clement, I'm going to show a little bit, has photographed Dennis Hopper and Daniel Day-Lewis. And you get a different take, but you have to have them feel comfortable too. But it's harder getting people who are the non-professional talent. If you're photographing a CEO or someone like you or me, and we're not used to being in front of a camera. Of course, now with all this YouTube, we're experts. But there's some truth to it.
Oh,
how do you make them feel comfortable? One of the photographers used to work with all these CEOs. Some have been photographed more than others, whether it's a Steve Jobs or a Charles Schwab financial, person. And they're used to it a little more because they're always getting shot for Forbes or Fortune magazine or the corporate things. But some people aren't, and you have to make them feel comfortable. You got to bring them in to the process. And I've learned that that's an amazing thing.
Yeah, that's an art. That's an art in itself, for sure.
Absolutely. This next photographer, I don't have any books by him, and he's late, but he almost became more famous after he died, unfortunately. You probably heard the name Robert Mapplethorpe. And Robert Mapplethorpe, grew up, was a friend of Patti Smith. In fact, she wrote several books of them in New York City, being young in New York, young artists. Did this great cover. Unfortunately, he died of AIDS, and he's one of the first artists, not the first, that almost became more famous after he died. In fact, he did. And half his work is very erotic, homoerotic, nude photography. And the other half, a lot of portraits and a lot of beautiful floral work, flowers, detailed. And his flowers are like his nudes. When a body is curled up, you see this lily, close up of a lily, and you could, some of the time they've been paired with some of his body shots and his nudes.
Okay.
And, also he got famous, unfortunately, because some of his shows got shut down and raided because, like I think in Washington, D.C., NEA, the NEA National Endowment of the Arts funded. And of course, that was during the time, which is not unlike where we are now, unfortunately, where controversial, why should we support this
mm-hmm.
homosexuality and this crazy artwork and this sadist, whatever they want to call it. But Mapplethorpe did this cover.
Okay.
He did this cover.
Okay, very good. Nice.
And he did this cover.
Oh,
great. And great. I mean, to me, he's a black and white photographer. I know he's done some color, but okay. I love his black and white photography. The only other one I'll show, because it's not a Patti Smith cover, is this Laurie Anderson album cover.
Very good. Okay.
And look at the richness of this portraiture. And he's an intimate photographer. And I think he was a shy guy. I read the Patti Smith book. It's an interesting time growing up on the Lower East Side, growing up in New York when it was cheap and fun and crazy and dirty. I mean dirty like in filthy and cheap.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
But you touched on a really interesting point there when you have a photographer like that, where you're reading about it. If you're not even familiar with this artist's work, and then it becomes, oh, it's controversial, or it's this, or it's that, and you're not taking the time, maybe not appreciating some of that photographer's work, but those album covers there are what he brings to the photography. It's a shame
Absolutely.
when artists get sidelined like that, or the news or the media writes these sensational stories, if you will, and then it gets sidelined, and
though
it's not appreciated.
It's good for the career and for the bank account, because unfortunately in Mapplethorpe's case, he died until he could reap the rewards of what his photographs go for. And it's crazy what art goes for. The art collecting world, which I'm not a part of, obviously, and there's a documentary on the whole bizarreness of fine art collecting. And photography has grown in stature, and there are, as I said, certain photographers, and their work is very expensive. I have a modest collection of rock and roll photography, and I'm not going to show those prints, but I have, well, as I go through it, I'll mention the names, but it's mostly rock and roll. I have obviously some Beatles photographs, and Grace Slick of Jefferson Airplane, and Johnny Cash, and a few other, Woody Allen, a few other people, photographers that I bought. When I bought them, they were kind of cheap, and not that they're crazy price, but I would buy prints for $100 to $200 that are now worth several thousand, and a couple thousand, but not like the ones, like if I had I have a big poster print of a Richard Avedon Lennon one in black and white in my living room. And I always wanted a signed copy of that and a print. And if that was a print, that'd be worth several $100,000 now. Yeah. But it's just a printed poster.
Oh, unbelievable. Absolutely incredible.
Here's one. I just have a one-off, but Barry Feinstein, I think he died in 2010, took this cover. And of course, we all know All Things Must Pass. And this is a book that's actually a recent book. He did a lot of the photographs at the concert for Bangladesh. And there's a whole book of his work of George Harrison around that time, around 1970, 71. So I do collect Beatle books, as some people know. And this is at the Bangladesh show. His work is really nice. He's done some other album covers too. Obviously, this is from the My Sweet Lord 45 picture sleeve. Which is great. But I do actually have a signed print of this cover. So I feel grateful that I have that in my collection. Wow. And I love it. I can't think right off what other album covers he had, but Barry Feinstein is a photographer that I like too.
Now, for that All Things Must Pass, was that originally taken in color? Because now you're seeing so many color or colorized versions of that photo. And it's kind of weird to see it in color. But was it originally taken in color and then black and white?
I think it was. I think it's most likely what photographers did. This is pre-digital. Now you just shoot it and you could transfer it either way. Of course, now on digital, if you went back to your negatives, all your color stuff you can transfer to black and white. You don't really want to colorize a black and white picture. I think that's a little tacky. It's been done. It was a style, like, in the 70s and 80s. That was a stylistic thing. In America, Ted Turner from CNN, who started CNN, Turner Broadcasting, started the thing about colorizing movies. And give me a break. It's a Wonderful Life, Hard Day's Night in color. No, thank you.
Oh, forget it.
Yeah. Oh. I mean, I like color films, but if it's in black and white, to me, that's the way it was done. My guess is, this is obviously a color. This is not touched. So most photographers, when you're on location and you have, an hour or a day with a subject, usually you shoot both. You have, let's say you bring 20 rolls of film of black and white, 20 rolls of film of color. In the days of film, you might bring several types of film. Oh. Anybody who studies photography will know that, like in black and white, for instance, there was Plus X and Tri-X, which are two Kodak films. And I don't want to get too technical, but Tri-X was a faster film, which means you didn't need as much light. You could shoot in low light, but it tended to be really a grainy film. And that's a style. You might want that style. Whereas Plus X, anything from 50 to 100 ASA, they call it, is very sharp and crisp. Of course, the better light you add to it, the more crisp your work's going to be. Plus, depending on kind of cameras you use, some of these photographers, just use handheld 35 millimeter cameras. Maybe they put it on a tripod, but if you've seen 35 millimeter film, it's small. So the larger you blow it up, you tend to get more grain, depending again on the film. So a lot of professional photographers and fashion photographers will use what they call medium format, which is 120. It's called 120 film, and it's usually a square format or a slightly elongated format. It's the same film. It just depends on the camera. You've heard of Hasselblad cameras. That's the camera, for instance, that Elvis Costello is using on his second album. He has a Hasselblad.
Okay.
I mean, that's a Hasselblad camera. So that's that's a square format camera. There's another camera called, was an RB40. It's a different, I'm blanking out the brand. Use that same film, but it gives you a slightly higher horizontal, vertical, rather than a square format. You get 1 or 2 less images per roll, but some photographers like that. And then you go 4x5 film or 8x10 film. That's when you're doing sheet film, one at a time. It's not roll film, but you get a big, beautiful, wonderful negative. And so if you in the old days, when you were shooting for billboards and things, they would say, we want to shoot this billboard, so we want to make sure we're going to blow it up so many DPI and everything. Now, digitally, it depends on your camera back and your digital files, and it's a little different. But that's a little more technical.
Wow, okay. Well, there you go. Yeah. Fascinating. Oh, it's a great journey of
I can't believe I know this much shit about this stuff. Here's a guy that is really interesting to me because Robert Whitaker, Bob Whitaker, Whitaker. He passed away a few years ago, and probably for most people who don't, I don't know if he's actually done any real album covers, but his claim to fame, especially for Beatle people, is taking this photograph.
Okay.
Now, this wasn't taken for an album cover, and those of you who know Yesterday and Today, this was an American-only comp, and they put this album on in a way. They mentioned, I was protesting Vietnam and all this stuff. And then, of course, there was all this controversy before it hit stores. It only hit radio stations and buyers. And they went back and they slapped over the cover of them in the trunk, which is a terrible cover.
That trunk cover.
But Bob Whitaker, his interest was sort of surrealism. And so if you look at the pictures he took around that time.
Okay, yeah.
This and these.
Right, yes, of course, yeah.
You kind of get it if you look at it as a series of work.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And they were up for this too. Like, they weren't coerced into posing. Like, they enjoyed, they thought, I love it.
But it wasn't for an album cover, and they needed a shot. And of course, here's an outtake of it.
Okay, yeah.
And it's crazy. There's a closer up version of that.
Okay, very good.
So I have a whole series of proof sheets and things from that. But Whitaker, I don't know. He did some cool surreal work, but he also, I think he photographed them in. Here's one. The back cover of Revolver.
Oh, that's him. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, very good.
Obviously, the front cover was an illustration and photo montage by Klaus Vormann. But I forgot he did the back cover of this. I try to keep up with all this stuff, and it's sort of hard to remember.
So much. I don't know how you do it.
Well, it's like anything else. One off. Jurgen Vollmer is one of the guys they met during the Hamburg days, and of course, you recognize this cover.
Yeah, that is so great.
This is from 1960 to 61 or 2, whenever it was in the early days, and there's the Beatles actually walking by out of focus. Yeah. I just love this cover. This is a perfect album to use it on. But he did this whole series of young. This is what you would call reportage or editorial style, just handheld camera of the scene of
not always having the subject necessarily in focus or right.
Right. It's an editorial style, which I love. I mean, that's why photography is so great, because it's just so. It's kind of like the stuff that's in the book. If you remember, the booklet of Quadrophenia has a lot of shots like that. It wasn't him. I don't know who photographed that, but here's look how young George Harrison is there.
Just a baby. My goodness.
Yeah. So one could argue right place, right time. You get a camera, you just take a bunch of pictures, and the person turns up and grows up to be someone famous, and you struck gold in a way.
Yeah. But those particular photos just capture, even if the Beatles were a footnote, they just capture a rock and roll time, a rock and roll moment, young kids abroad in Germany, just the quality of those photos alone are just incredible.
Another photographer that I really like, and I was lucky enough to meet him and talk to him like 2 or 3 times over the years, and he passed away just a few years ago. He was a young photographer in England, right during the heyday, and his name is Robert Freeman. And Robert Freeman did more covers of Beatle albums than any one photographer. He moved to Spain, and he lived in Spain the end of his life, and he passed away a few years ago. What's great about this is they were somewhere in England on tour, and he literally shot this in a hotel room with natural light, brought the curtain down, and it's not composited. It's all one photograph. But to me, this is one of the most amazing shots of the Beatles, and just beautiful shot.
Oh, absolutely.
He also did, in fact, here's a positive of the negative.
Oh, very cool. I've never seen that. That is cool.
So when when you're negative, you could reverse when you print it. There's ways of printing things differently, and it's a whole other. Yeah. I won't go through each book, but I will go through. You've obviously seen this. He did all these photographs.
Okay.
And he actually designed at the very end of A Hard Day's Night, where all these shots dissolve in each other. He designed the closing sequence for A Hard Day's Night and Help, where you have these pictures in the big red ruby diamond of Help. But these, I love these photographs. Yeah. I think they're really beautiful. He also did With the Beatles cover, where they're in the brown shrubbery in a way.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Not With the Beatles. Beatles for Sale. Excuse me.
Beatles for Sale.
Beatles for Sale. Yeah. He did Help, where they're standing in Help.
Wow.
And probably his other one that's most famous is this. And
that's what's great about the same photographer. Oh my gosh.
Same photographer. And what's great about this cover, two things I think stand out. First of all, he was presenting all these shots. He did a shootout in London of the Beatles at this park, and he was presenting it to him, and he had a piece of cardboard up on the wall to project on, and the cardboard slipped and started bending, and they loved it. So if you look at it, it's not a flat photograph. It's kind of like concave, convex.
Yeah.
That's what they loved about it. So that's how it was printed. And also, as far as I know, and I don't know if this is a rumor or not, this is the first album by any major artist that didn't have the artist's name on the cover.
I was just thinking about that, yeah, because the Beatles aren't. That's not on the cover anywhere.
Right.
Incredible.
And of course, all these photographs too.
Yeah. Now, in terms of the first photograph, a question of the Meet the Beatles, the classic one in the hotel. There's so many slightly different versions of that, where you see the sort of sweaters, and then other ones where it's really just their heads, and then you can
see the sweaters here.
There you can. Now, in terms of photographers, obviously when you've got the great photo and then it's on the album cover, and then the record company tends to do what it wants to do with it, does that upset photographers? If he really wanted the image of the sweaters as part of the picture, and then you're seeing it just black and white or whatever?
That's a very fair question, and that's where people like me come in sometimes, not probably back in those days, but usually when you're a commercial photographer and you're shooting, say, for advertising, and we get a whole contract and a purchase order, and there's this whole licensing agreement, which I don't want to get into, but when it's advertising, they're paying you a shitload of money. And so they can pretty much do what they want for one image or 10, however many images they're buying. And they can alter it. They can put one head onto another. My photographers try to, depending on the project, we try to offer, we'll do the retouching. We'll do it to look like we want it to do. But if you're doing some for a pharmaceutical campaign, they're jumping up on the beach with their dogs, they're going to do whatever they want. And they have their needs. They're going to crop it. They're going to everything else. In these days, I'm sure Robert Whitaker didn't have a choice. As you know, in Capitol, put that blue tint on it. So it was blue in America and a whole different thing instead of black with the Beatles. So I'm sure he didn't get any. They probably sent him prints. They probably didn't even send negatives. They probably just got actual prints this is before scanners, whatever they used at the time. Yeah. And they make it darker or lighter or retouch whatever they need. That's common. You don't get a choice. The more famous you are, you get say, though. You could, like Annie Leibovitz, probably gets a right of refusal. I don't know that for sure, but Avedon probably says, okay, you can do what you want, but I need to see it and sign off on it first.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time you don't get it. I never really got that, but that's why you do the fine artwork. The fine artwork, you get a chance to do those kind of things. Let me see if I have if there's another one here. Maybe not. No. Yeah. So, yeah, it's a great question. I mean, like, this is again, Bob Freeman.
Oh, I love that photo.
He was a friend of theirs, right place, right time, and they trusted him. Yeah. So it was a great thing.
Very cool. Very nice.
This is a cool guy, and he's still around now. And this is someone who, to me, was lucky, but he was a great photographer. And he was a young kid, American, goes to London in the right time, 1969. And think about it. He's in London, and the bands he's shooting, one of his early photo shoots, doing the final official photo session for this band.
Yeah. Right place, right time.
And This is Ethan Russell.
Okay.
Ethan Russell did that series of photographs that became on the Beatles' Hey Jude album. His work is also on the cover of Let It Be.
Okay.
In the UK, it came out with this beautiful book that I hate to open it because everybody who has this, I have 2 copies, and I'm the only person I know that the binding hasn't fallen apart.
That's reportedly
but all these great,
problem.
And I'm hoping this year with the anniversary that's coming out, I hope they do a reproduction of this book.
Yeah, they really should. I don't know why they wouldn't.
Right?
Yeah.
I bet you they'll do something like that, because if you got the Lennon, the John Lennon Imagine or Plastic Ono Band, the beautiful books in those, right? Those are great.
So nice big poster and everything. Sure. Yeah.
But also a couple other very famous pictures. He did almost all of not all of them, but the Linda Ronstadt albums in the 70s.
Okay. Now, what a difference in terms of those Beatles photos and that one, like completely.
This is probably one of his most famous ones too, that you'll definitely know.
And I'm sure there's a story or two about that photo shoot.
and just before the pandemic, he did a Kickstarter project, and I bought this book he did. That's a Rolling Stones tour in 72, I think. I have a signed copy of this I bought 20 years ago. This is John Lennon listening to the playback of the White Album at Abbey Road.
Oh my gosh.
And this is a beautiful book, signed book. Obviously pictures like, let's see here.
Frank Zappa there, I think.
You know from doing your showcases how hard it is to show this stuff.
You're doing a great job, Mazzy.
Well, it's actually easier being interviewed to do it.
Well, and some of those books get pretty heavy too, not like the
right
booklets from the
he did a lot of Stones, the Rock and Roll Circus. He did obviously the Who. What is that? That's at Altamont.
Yeah.
Altamont.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to.
Oh yes, more of the Let It Be session.
Let It Be stuff. So, I mean, a lot of other album covers. I mean, I think there's some outtakes in this book from the Who's Next pissing shot.
The pissing contest.
The pissing contest. I just got 2 more, and I'm going to do a little self promotion, and you can ask me questions. One of the photographers that I represent, who's sort of pulled back and not shooting much anymore, her name is Michelle Clement. These are some promo books that I do for my photographers.
Okay. Oh, nice.
And this is David Allen Brandt, Michelle Clement. That's Michelle Clement.
Oh, very good.
Ransom and Mitchell is more of a photography CGI team. You know, they do things like conceptual. So this is the stuff that we send out to our potential clients.
Very nice. Excellent.
You know, and sometimes we license it for album covers and things like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But Michelle in the late 80s did a series of, and this is a photo shoot I was at. This is a sort of a modernist 20th century music group called Kronos Quartet, and they're on Non-Such Records. And what I liked about this, Michelle shot a lot of black and white work, and this was sort of influence. You get these influences, and it was picked up by her and the art director who worked on this, based on sort of German expressionist photography of the 1940s, this dark shadow and light. And what was so exciting to me being at the shoot, the designer art director on the shoot, his name is John Kosh. Kosh was the art director, designed Abbey Road cover, and he designed Let It Be cover, and he designed all those Linda Ronstadt records throughout the years, and a lot of other record covers. So I sat at lunchtime talking about the Beatles.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
It was so exciting.
Oh, no
But
kidding.
I love that.
Very nice.
This is not a record this actually was a comeback record for her, but it was kind of an artsy image. And this was an album by Phoebe Snow that came out in the late 80s too. Okay. And Michelle photographed this. This is before Photoshop too. And she did the portraits of Phoebe in New York. And then in San Francisco, she did all these still life shots using a film called it's a Polaroid instant 35 millimeter film, and did this kind of artsy surreal. They wanted a surreal cover.
Beautiful.
And then lastly, these two, the jazz drummer, Tony Williams, obviously who played with Miles Davis. And he had a label or a series of albums for Blue Note Records. And Michelle did all his album covers. This is called Angel Street.
Oh, wow.
Angel Street. So it's kind of an artsy of flowers and nudes. Again, pre-Photoshop. And then this one, Native Heart. And this was about to go to press, and they had to go in and retouch the nipple off her because Walmart and the big box stores wouldn't carry it if she had a nipple.
Wow.
So in Walmart, women have no nipples.
Bad, the hype sticker maybe could have just covered it.
Well, they could have put like that.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
They could have put,
strategically placed hype sticker.
That was during that period of time. Remember when Frank Zappa was testifying and all the ratings of records and
absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, on that note, you talked about some of those that they weren't photoshopped, they weren't touched. How difficult is it now? Like we're so used to photoshopped items, or stuff that's been manipulated, and it takes away from the photos like that you really need to appreciate how much work went into these photos because they aren't photoshopped. I'm thinking of a lot of these sort of hypnosis album covers that look photoshopped, but most of them weren't. Like the momentary lapse of reason,
that's a good question. Hypnosis had it, and I have a whole book. I'm not going to show it here, but I have their archive of all their record covers. Those guys, Aubrey Powell and Storm Thorgerson, were geniuses. And a lot of the photographs were obviously photographed real, but they did their own kind of retouching in their own. I mean, obviously on fashion and portraiture, all these shots before that, people would hand retouch black and white images. So if you did a photo of Barbra Streisand or Simon and Garfunkel, you're taking the zits off. It's all hand done. You weren't doing it digitally like you can do it now with all this artificial stuff and, make someone, perfectly clear skin and no nose hair or whatever it is. But but compositing was a real thing. I mean, think about the Marvel and science fiction movies you see now. It's all done digitally, but you go back and think of movies with special effects. 2001, that's not digital. That was done organically with models and a different way of doing things. So it's just using the tools. And I always say, I'm not against digital. I'm not against synthesizers. I'm not against Photoshop. But when you use this stuff for good or evil, like any Yahoo, you or I don't know, I'm a shitty guitar player, but if I started learning GarageBand and a few things, I could make some kind of record and auto tune. It would sound okay. But if you're a great musician and you use these tools, you can make it sound fabulous.
Yeah, exactly.
So you still need a good eye. And anybody, like right now, my business over the last 10, 15 years has changed because every fucking yodel with an iPhone can take a picture and does take a picture. There's good things about it because we all have it. We can record in your house. You can take pictures. You can make movies. You can do YouTube videos. It's great. But anybody can do it. But the people that stand out, no lighting, no composition. Can you learn that? Sure, you can go to photo school, but I think it's better organically to just do it.
Yeah, Yeah.
personally, you know.
Exactly. And for the years, the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album cover, I always thought that that was just cut and pasted. I had no idea initially that that was an actual photograph with the cardboard cutouts that were all placed. Obviously, as you mentioned, there's a little bit of touching and maybe a little bit of color here and there, but the fact that that's a photo is
Yeah,
incredible.
I didn't pull that down. That photo was taken by a guy named Michael Cooper, who also, ironically, later that year took the cover of Satanic Majesty's Request. See, the Beatles
Oh,
never, Stones never copied the
no,
Beatles at
no,
all. No,
no, no, absolutely. They were
but
completely
but the
separate.
but the art direction concept was a modern artist, collage artist called Peter Blake. Peter Blake did that cover. You're right. They blew up and cut all the celebrity heads out. And I have a book that has all the outtakes and the
Yeah.
session photos of that. He also did the cover of Stanley Road by Paul Weller.
Oh,
He
okay.
did the cover of the last album, Who, with all the little
Oh, right. Yes,
squares.
yes, yes.
So he's a collage artist, sort of famous in the UK. But I mean, yeah, it's great to see all those pictures because there I think I forgot which two. There were two celebrities that wouldn't give them permission. I think one was Leo Gorcey of the Young Rascals, the Little Rascals. What do you
Oh,
call it?
okay. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Bowery
Bowery
Boys,
Boys. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
because he wanted money,
Right.
and they didn't pay anybody. And one of them was something like was it Marlena Dietrich or no, one of the old Hollywood old movie stars
Okay.
didn't want. She goes, I don't want to be a part of a Lonely Hearts Club type of thing. So they changed it.
And then Gandhi was originally part of that, but then was airbrushed out
Was he
almost at the
airbrushed out
last
too? Yeah.
almost at the
Okay.
last second.
I used to know all that stuff, and I can't remember.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that book I have, which I didn't show this kid, is so great because you see these outtakes and side things when they're setting it up and they're moving the drums around and they're positioning the big stand-ups. Yeah,
Oh,
you're right. Nowadays they could just cut these out and digitally put that together.
fantastic.
And even Frank Zappa just put it together for "We're Only in It for the Money." That parody he did on
Right.
that.
That's right. That's
The
right.
last photographer I'm going to show is a guy I knew for about 25 years, tempestuous gentleman. His name was Jim Marshall, born in San Francisco. He was a high intense guy. There's a documentary on him that I haven't seen yet. I don't think it's on streaming. It came out during the pandemic. This was that's Jim Marshall.
Okay.
And you'll know one of his most famous shots is, have you ever seen the shot of Johnny Cash flipping people
yes,
off?
absolutely. Yeah.
He took that. He was one of
Okay.
those photographers, all handheld,
Uh,
Leica
my
photography, Leica
Oh.
cameras, all negative. He wasn't a digital guy, but his stuff, blues,
oh my gosh.
jazz artists.
And how hard is that too, with handheld cameras, to not have everything just blurry all the time with people in action like that?
The thing is,
posing.
you shoot
That's
it
incredible.
when you're shooting a roll of 20 or 36 exposures. All you needed to get was one good one.
Yeah. Oh.
And I don't mean that to take away, but it's luck and timing, and that it's the moment. Let's see.
Classic.
Johnny Cash, the prison. He took the inner panel Woodstock.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, great.
Jimi Hendrix at Monterey. A lot of Jefferson Airplane. I mean, he was in San Francisco, Mike Bloomfield. This is the beautiful overview. Beautiful Grace Slick. I think there's Grace Slick and Janis Joplin.
I love that photo of those two together.
I mean,
Janis
he's taken the most iconic pictures. I only own 2 of his photographs now. I used to have a bunch of them, and I sold them during the Depression of 28 and 9 because I bought him when he went through a drug thing of work furlough for a year because he brandished a weapon and he was doing a lot of cocaine. Crazy guy, but great photographs. And my story about him, I used to go to New York a couple times a year to take my photographers' portfolios. And one time I ran into him at a bar because he was always at bars. And he goes, I'll buy you a drink. Where are you going? I said, I'm going to New York for a week and to show my books. He goes, why don't you take my work? And he would talk like that. And he's like, oh, fuck you, cocksucker, you know. And I said, Jim, I would represent you in a minute if you were dead. Because he had the most beautiful archive.
Oh, my gosh.
This is a book that came out about 3 or 4 years ago because he did the prison stuff of Johnny Cash. Of course, this.
Oh, fantastic.
Just beautiful stuff. But just the few albums I'm going to show, obviously, he did both prison covers. He did the famous Flip Shot. He did this beautiful album, John Coltrane.
Okay.
Wow. Ballads.
Wow.
In fact, I have a print of his that I got. That's a signed print to him of that session when John Coltrane is waiting on a bench. It's over there. But this is a great picture. It was used later on a album cover.
Okay. Yeah.
I love that picture. And probably one of the most famous ones, too, is this.
Oh, my goodness.
Right? And what's great about it for this, I don't know if you ever got this box set, all the outtakes were used for the records inside.
Oh, very nice. Yeah. Oh, fantastic.
And if you remember, there was a CD reissue of this, and it was in color. So he did shoot some color in that. Mm-hmm. But Jim Marshall has one of the most amazing archives, and of the Jefferson Airplane, the Grateful Dead, Bill Graham stuff, jazz artists, a lot of jazz covers. He did blues covers. There's a famous Grant Green cover that says Grant Green of a signpost that is a corner of a street. There's 2 street corners called Grant and Green in North Beach in San Francisco, and they use that on the cover of the Grant Green album. So I'm in awe of him. Yeah. He was crazy, tempestuous. I can't wait to see the documentary on him, but that's my last photographer I'm showing. And just a great archive, but again, all handheld and all natural light, no lighting, no supplemental lighting like these other he wasn't a studio photographer. You know, he shot, there's a whole book he did called Jazz Festival. He would shoot all these things at the Monterey Jazz Festival year after year throughout the 60s and early 70s. And it's great stuff.
Oh, fantastic.
I mean, there's so many other photographers we could show. Francis Wolff for Blue Note. And now the guy that's getting a lot of notation, you had mentioned before we went on the air, this Crosby, Stills and Nash box set coming out. Yeah, and I think there's a book in it. Henry Diltz is a photographer that did the cover of those albums and all the Laurel Canyon stuff with Graham Nash and Joni Mitchell and a lot of that kind of LA stuff in the late 60s, early 70s.
Oh, absolutely wonderful. Well, Mazzy, this has been an amazing journey. I do have a burning question with regards to live album photo covers. And I'm just curious on your thoughts on this. Often for live album covers, maybe through the 70s or 80s, why was there always like a blurry, not always, but you often see really blurry covers or blurry photos for a live album? Is that just supposed to be the action of the live performance? Is that what they're capturing? But there's just seems to be so many examples of that.
I think there are a couple of, I think one thing is they want the moment. People feel live is something happening. So that's the maybe editorial explanation. I think the reality is it's low lighting. You're using handheld stuff. A lot of those artists, in fact, eventually I'm going to do, I took a lot of pictures at Winterland in San Francisco in the 70s before they didn't allow you to bring cameras. I'm going to do a video on those someday. But a lot of times you're using a longer lens. A normal lens is 50, 52, 55 millimeter. So you might use a 100 or 200 millimeter lens. So you get more, first of all, you get more grain in your film. You have to use a slower, faster film, which I said. And also there's things moving around and you just literally, you're moving, you're trying to stay still. The artist is moving. It's just the nature of the beast, I think. You can't get them to sit there, you know, with dead meat on them, you know, it's just not going to happen.
And I guess it just, it captures that live feel. And I think it must be what they're looking for, that sort of thing. So, yeah. And again, an amazing, absolutely amazing journey in terms of these, the photography. And one more thought in terms of album covers. Fantastic. LPs, CD size, shrunk everything. I don't want to say it killed the photography, but it really, in terms of the creative design, the CD booklet really had a
Well,
dent.
you know, it changed things a lot.
Yeah.
On the other hand, like when the box sets started coming out, think of Eric Clapton's Crossroads, and Robert Johnson's not a good example because there's only like three photographs of him in existence. But Janis Joplin, and I'm going to go back to Jim Marshall. Jim Marshall was a pussycat and I'm going to say it, fucking son of a bitch. And he had a great copyright lawyer, and he would sue everyone and threaten, and he would make a shitload of money during the CD era because all of a sudden Janis Joplin, Columbia does a box set, Sony, Columbia does a box set, all these outtakes. They would, maybe pay, I don't know, 15, 20, 30 grand for a pot of images of outtakes from Monterey or from whatever the session is. Allman Brothers, maybe he'll get 5, 10, 15 grand for a reissue of Fillmore. And in fact, I recall his lawyer suing labels when CDs first came out, where his covers were saying, I never allowed you to use these on a compact disc. It was only for an LP. Now, I don't remember all the details how that worked. Wow. Because a lot of artists didn't get that, a lot of photographers, because a lot of times usually there's a whole thing of licensing called a buyout, or they buy the copyright. Photographers, we don't like that. We just want to license it for a specific neat time. And I think that his stuff was only for the album, for the record album, I guess. So he got more money from certain labels like Columbia. Of course, they would kiss his ass because they were putting out Sly Stone box sets and Janis Joplin box sets and Grateful Dead box sets. And they would want to use a lot of these great images he had later. So my guess is he made more as an archivist, and he wasn't really shooting a lot of new work after the 90s or 80s, 90s. It was all these great archive of Miles Davis and John Coltrane and Jefferson Airplane and whatever. So I think, but you're right. We love the big cover. We love the big artwork, 12 by 12. Come on. Yeah. But you have a whole booklet of images that you didn't have maybe on the original in some cases.
Yeah. And are we ready now? Obviously, vinyl back, as we well know. Do you think the photographers? I'm just wondering if they have gone from the album cover to the CD, and now going from the CD back to the big album covers. Are the photographers ready to embrace that again, or are they still thinking in almost a CD kind of?
Artists love it. The thing is, again, I used to get a lot more work from record companies, but my artists are sort of in the middle. I call them the B list, and I don't mean that to disparage them. The A list are the celebrity photographers, Annie Leibovitz, Danny Clinch, who does Springsteen, all these people now. It would have been Avedon. It would have been Herb Ritz, who's long gone. There's celebrity photographers that celebrities want to be shot by celebrity photographers. It's like that vicious circle. If they, my person who might be a great photographer can do as good a job, but Michelle Clement, David Allen Brandt, they don't know them from Adam. So who is this friggin' person, Or on the other hand, they're friends of the bands, REM grows up with photographer. Maybe, think of what Weezer, people are artists, whatever group's coming up now. Those have been around a long time. Have artist friends, illustrators, designers. And so they'll get their friends to do it. So, and plus you can't get paid as much for an album cover now, unless you're shooting Taylor Swift or Billie Eilish or not Whitney Houston, whoever's, anyway, Jay-Z, whoever is a big selling, you could get $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 for a package, maybe more, depending. But if you're shooting for an album of, Gillian Welch and David Rawlings, it's probably friends of theirs, artists they know that might get a grand or two, maybe. I don't even know what it's a different world,
It is a different world. But it's beautiful photographs, beautiful album covers, and those books are just amazing. I do love those photography books. That's just an amazing way to capture somebody's repertoire, somebody's life.
And an artist like it, a lot of times they're called monographs when it's one artist having an art piece. And artists don't get rich off those books, but it's sort of like having a museum show. it almost elevates your work. And then maybe collectors will say, like, you can go to the Jim Marshall site and buy prints, and some are archival, but those go for a lot. Archival means they came out at a time when Jim Marshall was alive, and they're from the negatives. Now there's a series of digital prints. They're digitally printed. They're not what they call either fiber-based prints or selenium-based prints or silver gelatin. There's these different, in the old chemical style, when you go into a dark room.
Yeah.
Now it's a digital, print. Nothing wrong with that. Is it archival, the pigments in that inks? Maybe, maybe not, So going back to get a vintage Ansel Adams or a vintage Richard Avedon is going to cost you a lot more than getting a digital reproduction, like any artwork,
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
Well, Mazzy, thank you so much. This has been an amazing journey. Thank you so much for sharing all the amazing photos and the books and the album covers. And we'll chat again soon. Is there anything coming on your channel down the wire that's a big one to watch out for? You mentioned a few things. You have something you're working on? More collabs and things?
I have no collabs. I haven't had a collab, but I'm glad you invited me on this. I sorry it got delayed, but I have no collab set up. I have a couple of rankings. The psychedelic thing took off, which is bizarre. And I've had to respond to people because I tried to call it out as a psychedelic scene. And I've been called out by so many people. Dan Hicks isn't psychedelic and Boz Skaggs isn't psychedelic. And I totally get that. But when we do our videos, just like you, this is our opinion, our take. It's not a wah-wah fuzzy guitar, but it came out at a time when there was a scene in San Francisco. I did a British one that'll come up next week, UK 60s British side. It's a scene. Mm-hmm. So it's not.
Absolutely.
So I shouldn't have to defend it. I should just shut up about it. But that's the one thing that people keep saying.
Oh,
I think I want to do a photography like that. So after you post it for a while, if you maybe send me the file, and I'd like to maybe use it down the line after you post it for a while.
Sure, absolutely. Will do. It'd be my pleasure. Again, I know you're busy. Thank you so much for your time on this one. Norman Maslow, ladies and gentlemen.
Jamie Cottle, the king of the box set.
So we'll chat again soon. Take care.
Mazzy loves you. Thank you.